Hi again, folks. Glad you're with us in the Cobb TV studios with Chairman Mike Boyce for his weekly chat. How are you doing today?
Good. It's one of those weeks where, surprisingly, the first time in 15 months that I come to the video where there isn't a lot piling up on my plate.
Which may be, you may have just jinxed yourself by saying that.
Probably. Well, it could also be a good sign that, that sometimes it takes a while for the new administration to get its way of doing things where everybody's in sync on it. And I think that's what's happening now is that whether it ranges from the zoning hearing we had this week, where I'm very pleased to see that every side of the party involved on a new application or new for zoning understands how we do business, and that it's better to have everything done, have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted before you come before the board, because the board listens to every single case, and they don't make a decision until they think they've heard all the facts. So I'm very pleased that when we go through whether it's a zoning hearing or a board meeting, that everyone has done their homework, which allows the process to come off being smooth. What they don't see is the amount of commitment on the part of the commissioners to make sure that they're ready for every meeting.
And when I was a reporter, I came to the realization that while we concentrated on the BOC meetings, if you really wanted to get the pulse of the community, what matters to them, right, and the feedback they give the commission, those zoning hearings are where it's at.
And it's a very important part. As I tell people, the commissioners, I have to remind the public that the commissioners are part-time. Now, that's really a joke because they're not part-time. The old line, they work from 6 in the morning to 6 at night. That's part-time. But they could spend their time just doing zoning cases. Zoning cases require a lot of homework and coordination between the commissioner, developer, and the community around them to make sure that when a proposed zoning change comes into play at the Planning Commission or at the board hearing, that everyone has had a chance to come to the table and have their side spoken about, and then there's a consensus reached about how to get there. And the best example of that, of course, is that when we have the zoning hearings, there are items that are on consent. And when they're on consent, that means everybody that is part of that discussion agrees to the principles of the zoning, and they don't need to have a discussion about it. But there were two zoning cases this week where what happens is that we call for those who are in favor of supporting the zoning and those that are in opposition to the zoning as proposed. And we had two cases this week where there was nobody that opposed to the zoning. So I guess my question is, why wasn't it on consent? But I think that just reflects the hard work done by all parties. The commissioners, the developers, the legal teams that are associated with each other in the community, is that everybody gets together and realizes that there's no sense coming to the board without showing them they've done their due diligence, because it's going to be put on continuance or denied, and that doesn't accomplish anything what anybody wants. And I'm just glad to see that on this case here, we had a number of cases, and we were done by noon, but that we didn't rush through the cases. We gave every one of them the time they deserved. In one case here, I went in thinking that it would be passed. Once again, I was proved wrong. It was continued because of the comments made by commissioners at the board.
And should remind people that if they're interested in watching those are always saved on our YouTube channel, right, and you can go back anytime and watch them. Speaking of zoning, we were at a meeting last night at the Sprayberry High Theater that was standing room only.
Yeah, it was packed.
There were hundreds there concerned about the Sprayberry Crossing shopping center that's been for 2 decades, a situation, let's just put it that way, in the neighborhood. And how hard was it to deal with a room full of people with frustrations when you really have to tell them that the process is working its way through?
Well, I think the public, my sense is that a hard decision or e-decision, they really appreciate their elected officials showing up for the meetings. I think they realize that their time and our time is valuable. As I mentioned last night, even though it was in District 3, I thought it was the responsibility of my office to show support for our commissioner by being there. And to show that I got the gravity of the situation, and that the county, I didn't want to have her speaking for the county or for the board. That's my job. So if something came up during the question and answer period, I didn't want to put her in the hot spot of having to speak for the board. But the other part was I was really impressed by the two gentlemen that have organized this group, how when the question and answer period started, there were obviously, like you said, there were frustration because, as I mentioned several times, government at best moves ponderously. There's no such thing as a quick reaction program for government because we've got to be very careful that we meet all the guidelines of the law. And we do not, we can't very well argue for limited government and then expect us to have unlimited power in a situation that's uncomfortable or displeasing to you. So, but the meeting I think last night reflected two things. First of all, had really, really great leadership in the two gentlemen that brought this group together. And the second thing, it reflected the public. That meeting could very easily, dissolved into a finger pointing and people yelling at each other. And instead, we got the kind of audience that I've come to see across Cobb County. That if you go to the meeting and you show A, that you respect for them by showing up for the meeting, and B, telling them where you're coming from, what you're trying to do, and where you're trying to go in response to their concerns, they will work with you. And that's what I saw last night. Everybody understanding this is a very difficult situation, but we're all trying to get to a result that reflects a community that cares about itself. And last night, I think that they saw that the government, by passing this community, this has some complicated Community Reinvestment Act or some kind, and I can't use the B word because they get all.
And don't
upset
ask me for help either because I forget it every time.
That's exactly. But it's a long, convoluted term that in a layman's term is the B word, which is blight. They see that we have finally got something in place that has teeth, but like everything else in government, you have to go through the legal wickets. And last night, we explained all the legal wickets of what we can or can't do. And the moment that you get outside those wickets and try to do something as an end around, you end up back in court. So you just draw the process out even longer. So, but there are some things that I heard last night that I think we can do. And I've asked the county attorneys to look at some legislation that's already on the books that might allow us to address situations like that.
And again, this is something that started through a Facebook page, power
right.
of social media.
Yes.
And I heard your message to those folks last night is that the power of people can
It
move it along.
In this county, it does. I cannot say this enough. If you show up and you make a point, and the point is well reasoned, then this board will react to that. It understands that we derive our power from the people, and the moment a government gets in trouble is when it thinks that it knows better than the people, and that's not this board. So I know that 20 years is a long time to have tried to get some resolution to this. And that 20 years is a long time in anybody's book. I'm not going to diminish that. But this time around is that we actually have ordinances in place that we think can address this in a certain way, but there's no question about it. If you want to get something done in America, you go to the people. When the people get together, nothing can stop them. And on this one here, I saw last night a group of people that have finally reached their limit, and they're going to do something about it, but they're going to do it in a way that reflects our respect for the law.
And on another topic, we're kind of in a homework mode, it seems to me, when it comes to a trip you're going to be making with the county manager and our finance folks to visit the rating agencies in New York next month, early next month. And what would your message be about what is going to be accomplished up there and their importance to the people of Cobb County?
Yeah, all right. Well, the bottom line is that we've had, for 21 years in a row now, we've had AAA bond rating. And, while that's important, what we do should support that AAA bond rating. It shouldn't be our driving factor. What we should be focusing on here as a board, as a government, is providing the services that people expect us to provide at a cost that reflects the proper use of taxpayer money. If we do all those things right, then our AAA bond rating will be maintained. But there's no question about it that if we don't do what's necessary to reflect that AAA rating, they'll take it away from us. And that'll have an adverse effect on us almost immediately because that raises the interest rate that we have to use to borrow money to bridge the gap between the spring and the fall when we start collecting taxes again. And I think that's the part of this process that confuses most people if they know about it at all, is that we have to borrow money during the year because the way our budget system doesn't match our collection system. And every year over the last 3 years, the amount of money we have to borrow has been getting bigger and bigger because we have not been applying the appropriate millage rate to pay for our expenses. All right, we've been raiding buckets. Like I said, the water fund 2 years ago, last year the economic development fund, and then this year there's no bucket to raid. And the amount of money that we have to ask to borrow every year until we catch up with our revenue collection gets bigger because we haven't had a millage rate that reflects that. In other words, if I have a millage rate of X, then I'll get so much money. If I have a millage rate that's X minus 1, I'll get lower money. If I have a millage rate of X plus 1, I'll get more money. And right now, we've been trying to somehow believe that we can have millage rates of X minus 1 for 3 years in a row now, and we're going to collect more money. Well, no economic theory or practice reflects that. So they're going to be looking very, very carefully at us next month as to what we plan to do over the next year. And if we don't give them the right answer, that we in fact have a plan to reverse this direction of how we collect millage to support our services here, or to balance the budget without raiding buckets, there's no question about it. Our AAA rating will be in jeopardy. And I don't want anybody to take this lightly. I don't take it lightly, but I don't take it lightly for the right reason, which is every time I have to borrow money at a higher rate, that means that's less money I get to spend in the general fund to provide services. So we have our work cut out for us over the next couple of weeks.
Right, and there's a lot of Q&A I know that's going to go on. You've gotten some feedback from them already,
right,
so you can start getting the answers.
Yeah. Well, the difference this year is I've been in office 15 months. Last year I went to New York. You know, I barely understood how the budget process worked. Well, this has been a very instructional, informational year for all of us on the board. We know exactly where we want to go and how we want to get there. But the variable this time, as always, is do we have the argument that will convince the people to allow us to do what we need to get done? If we don't have a strong enough argument, then rightfully so, they'll reject our proposal because we have not defended it in a way that justifies how we want to use their money. But the difference between last year and this year is that I've already gone out and told people what the bill is, how I want to pay for it, and that's the story. We've been sticking to it. And we know that we've been advertising that there's a $30 million shortfall in the budget. That equals 1.1 mil. And that my job over the next 5 months or 4 months is to get out and inform the public. This is what that additional 1.1 mil will provide for you and maintain the quality of life you've come to expect.
Well, again, next month is a trip to New York. We will talk, though, between now and then, and ask everybody to stay attention and pay attention to our social media pages as well, and our YouTube channel to keep on top of what's going on here in Cobb County. And we will be back next week.